Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a time when bread could break your spirit more than bullets could break your bones. You're not in cozy France anymore, you're in Egypt. It's 1798, and the sun is already plotting your slow demise. You trudge off a creaky transport ship onto a shoreline that glows with heat. The sand bakes your boots like pastry crust. You're wearing layers because someone in Paris thought wool was desert ready. You're with Napoleon's Grande Armée, part of a grand, weird mission to claim Egypt for science, for glory, and for reasons still argued about by historians to this day. The good news? You've been promised rations, shelter, and the protection of a man so charismatic he can talk people into storming pyramids. The bad news? Well, you're already sweating through your socks, you can't see anything through the heat haze, and someone forgot to pack enough flour. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing those pop up across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've barely gotten your bearings in this new world when you notice something odd. No one is cooking. The soldiers around you look hungry, not with that dramatic, opera-style hunger, but the kind where everyone's pretending they're full just to avoid discussing the problem. You pass a group gnawing quietly on what might be bread, but it sounds more like they're chewing on sandstone. One man tries to dunk his in canteen water. It doesn't soften. The Nile glistens nearby, serene and ancient. It offers water, transport, and the illusion of fertility. But the army's supplies didn't exactly include a culinary crash course in regional grains, nor did anyone consult the locals on baking methods. It's almost charming how confident the French are, assuming they can just whip up a Parisian baguette in a mud brick oven with unfamiliar flour and none of the right tools, and yet, here you are, dragging a cannon through sand dunes while snacking on what might be a cursed artifact. This is not the heroic conquest you imagined. There are no cheering crowds, no romantic deserts. Just you, your blisters, and a piece of bread that could legally qualify as a weapon. The officers try to maintain morale. You hear one shout, "For France!" as he waves a bayonet, presumably toward the British. But you're pretty sure everyone's more focused on finding someone who knows how to bake something edible. At night, the desert cools down, and that's when the camp comes alive in its strange way. Fires flicker. Soldiers trade stories, some exaggerated, some probably real, like the tale of the guy who tried to soften his bread by burying it in hot sand. Spoiler, it caught fire. You sit near your tent, scraping the edge of your ration loaf with a knife, trying to identify whether that's flour or just dry dirt. A nearby corporal quietly whittles his bread into dice. It's easier than biting into it, and now he has something to gamble with. There's a kind of collective, unspoken understanding growing among the troops. The British might be a threat. Disease, sure. Sunstroke, inevitable. But the bread. The bread is the real enemy. Napoleon, for all his genius, is too busy measuring pyramids and declaring symbolic victories to notice that his men are starting to dream about chewing gum and sponge cake. One soldier even draws a diagram in the sand for a softer biscuit, which looks suspiciously like a modern donut, and then there's the smell. In the heat, even the bread gives up. You sniff one loaf and wonder, with a chill, if it's actually fermenting from inside. A fellow infantryman whispers, "Maybe it's alive now," and no one laughs. That kind of joke stops being funny after day 5, still, you manage to fall asleep that first night, just barely. A dry wind rustles the canvas above you. Your jaw aches from the one bite you managed earlier. You dream of bakeries, of soft brioche and cafe windows fogged with steam. In the distance, cannon fire rumbles. You don't flinch. It's not the worst thing you've heard today. Morning begins not with a bugle, but with someone cursing at a piece of bread. You crack one eye open to find your neighbor, Henri, attempting to gnaw through his morning ration like a beaver. His expression hovers somewhere between stoic resignation and quiet despair. The sun is already back at it, pouring heat down like soup into your uniform. You sit up, brushing sand off your tongue, because yes, somehow, even the inside of your mouth is gritty. The rations were supposed to be manageable. Napoleon's supply officers had sketched out a fairly standard plan: hardtack, dried vegetables, salted meat, a little wine or brandy for morale, and a daily bread ration to keep up energy. But this? This isn't bread. It's more like sculptural material. You tap it on your canteen. It clinks. The flour supply, limited to begin with, came in bags that had taken a good dunking during disembarkation. Damp flour turns into clumps, then into mold colonies, then into something not even seagulls will eat. But desperate times create desperate chefs. The camp's makeshift bakers are using whatever survived, grain mixed with sand, camel fodder, maybe a prayer, and attempting to make something loaf-shaped. You approach the baking tent, if you can call it that, and find a pair of wide-eyed young men arguing in rapid French. One waves a chunk of something at the other, possibly dough, possibly a failed experiment in edible roofing tile. The ovens are just shallow pits lined with stone and heated by burning brush. It works for flatbread, if you know what you're doing. The French bakers don't. Still, the army sticks to schedule. Each morning, someone stumbles by your tent and tosses in a hunk of ration bread. It's hot from the fire, but not soft, never soft. You tear a piece off, try to chew, and discover a familiar sensation, jaw fatigue. The trick, you've learned, is to soak the bread in whatever liquid you've got. Tea, wine, Nile water. Even sweat might help at this point. By midday, a rumor spreads through camp like wildfire. Someone received an actual French-style loaf. A miracle. Soldiers drift toward the source like pilgrims. You follow too, because why not hope? It turns out the miracle loaf was a hallucination. A sun-drunk lieutenant mistook a chunk of limestone for ciabatta and praised it as slightly overbaked. He's now napping under a palm tree, unaware he's become the punchline of the day. The hunger isn't dire yet, but it's enough to mess with your head. You keep thinking about food back home, buttery croissants, sourdough with apricot jam, even stale baguettes that still flaked when broken. A fellow soldier sighs and mutters, "At least the British know how to make a proper biscuit." You all glare at him in betrayal. This is also the day you meet Jean-Pierre, a wiry little man with a mustache too large for his face and a deep vendetta against all baked goods in Egypt. He claims to have been a pastry chef in Lyon. He refers to the camp bread as culinary heresy and regularly throws his rations into the desert like they've insulted his ancestors. Somehow, he's survived on a combination of boiled roots and complaints. That evening, you sit in a half circle with a few others, comparing blisters and debating what the bread's texture reminds you of. Suggestions include dried coral, compressed chalk, and the ghost of food. The fire crackles as someone attempts to toast their loaf over open flame. It blackens and cracks like pottery. The jokes are still flowing, but the tension is creeping in. You notice more men skipping meals or trading bread for anything else. One man swaps his loaf for a single button. Another trades for a small piece of driftwood he's convinced smells faintly of cinnamon. You don't judge. You just chew quietly, letting your thoughts drift. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian bread rations were truly worse than those of other military campaigns. Some claim it's exaggerated in memoirs. Others point to archaeological findings of grain samples filled with grit and char. You personally think historians should be forced to eat this stuff before making any conclusions. The bread is changing things. Not dramatically, no riots yet, but slowly, like wind carving canyons. Morale is low. Jokes are a little darker. Soldiers are getting tired faster, healing slower. It's hard to stay inspired when every meal is a punishment, and still, the officers insist it's fine. They're used to luxury, sure, but they also eat separately, with slightly better supplies. One captain even receives a care package from home: a cheese, proper bread, dried cherries. He shares none of it. His tent mysteriously burns down 2 days later. That night, your stomach groans as you curl up in your blanket. You've eaten just enough to stay upright, not enough to feel full. The wind rustles the tents. Somewhere nearby, someone's quietly sobbing over a rock-hard crouton. You dream of butter. Again, you're not surprised anymore when breakfast arrives with a dull thunk, a small, dense, slightly burnt cube that smells vaguely of despair. The loaf is darker today, bordering on blackened at the edges. You sniff it cautiously. Hints of charcoal, dust, and something earthy. Maybe goat? You can't tell. You try to break it with your fingers. No luck. You resort to banging it against the butt of your musket until a piece snaps off like brittle stone. And that's when someone mentions it: it's the flour. We're almost out. The great French wheat crisis of the Egyptian campaign didn't begin all at once. It crept up quietly, cloaked in miscalculations, humidity, and a total underestimation of how many mouths Napoleon had to feed in the desert. French quartermasters had stocked enough for the journey, sure, but they assumed Egypt would provide the rest. A bountiful land of pyramids, dates, and, allegedly, wheat. But what they didn't count on was how that wheat was distributed, and how deeply woven it was into a local economy that had zero interest in feeding European invaders. Egyptian grain was already in high demand, reserved for locals and controlled through a maze of taxes, bribes, and tradition. The French tried to requisition it anyway, diplomatically at first, then not so diplomatically. The results? Limited and extremely grudging cooperation from local millers, most of whom handed over their worst stock just to be done with it, so now you're eating wheat that barely qualifies as wheat. Mixed with bits of barley, sand, and what you suspect is pulverized limestone, it turns into something that looks like dough but behaves like masonry. Some soldiers swear they saw small pebbles in their loaves. You don't doubt it. One bold baker tried adding water from a canal to stretch the mix, which led to a small outbreak of stomach flu and a formal ban on creative hydration methods. Another attempted to flavor the dough with local herbs, which backfired spectacularly when the result tasted like boiled grass seasoned with regret. You sit with Henri and Jean-Pierre near a half-shaded tent flap, each gnawing away in silence. I would give my bayonet for a crust of rye, Jean-Pierre mumbles. You believe him, hunger makes you notice things. Like how the horses get better feed than the men. Like how the officers are now receiving flour directly from France, small, precious shipments jealously guarded. Like how some soldiers are going to bed early. Not out of discipline, but to skip a meal they dread. There's a subtle shift happening in the camp's mood. Less laughter. More sighing. And a growing fascination with anything that isn't this bread. You see men sniffing the local acacia trees, asking villagers if certain roots are edible. Someone even tries to boil a cactus. Historians still argue whether this flour shortage was purely logistical failure or part of a deeper misjudgment about colonization. Was Napoleon naive about Egypt's resources, or just overly confident? Maybe both. Either way, you're the one paying the price, one bite at a time, and let's talk about what this bread is doing to your digestion. You hear someone groan from the latrines. Another soldier swears he hasn't been able to go in days. The camp doctor starts prescribing wine as a laxative, which oddly improves morale but doesn't fix the problem. Soon, the bread becomes more than a meal, it's a shared trauma. Napoleon, of course, is still Napoleon. You catch a glimpse of him on horseback, looking absurdly composed as he surveys the banks of the Nile. Word is, he still insists the men are in good spirits. He gives speeches about destiny, empire, the glory of science. You'd applaud if you weren't busy trying to dislodge a piece of bread from your molar with a twig. Some soldiers keep small journals. You peek at one belonging to a man named Louis, a former schoolteacher. He's stopped writing about battles and strategy. Now it's all food, detailed dreams of stews, pastries, and childhood breakfasts. His most recent entry just says, "I would trade my soul for a figure." That evening, a fight breaks out over a rumor that one squad found an intact sack of flour. It turns out to be plaster powder. Still, someone tries to bake it. It goes about as well as you'd expect. You lie awake under the stars, belly hollow, lips dry, bread shard tucked under your bedroll like a souvenir from a terrible museum. The Nile winds silently in the dark, ancient and unconcerned. The stars look down, indifferent as ever. You close your eyes and try to dream of softness. You wake to the sharp scent of smoke and the muffled sound of cursing from the direction of the baking pit. Again. You don't rush to see, it's become a daily ritual now, like morning prayers, but with more profanity and fewer miracles. This morning's loaf is visibly scorched. You pick it up carefully, half expecting it to crumble to dust or shatter like pottery. Instead, it emits a dull thud as it lands in your mess tin. Jean-Pierre gives it a single look, then throws his into the bushes. "It offends me," he mutters. Turns out the bakers tried something new, hotter ovens. Or, more precisely, deeper pits with more brushwood and a guess. The result? Loaves that are cooked outside, raw inside, and all around unpleasant. They call it crust-forward baking. You call it culinary surrender. Back in France, bread was an art form. Here in Egypt, it's more like an experiment in edible geology. The locals, of course, have been baking in the desert for generations. They make soft, flat-ish bulleted simple, smoky bread that puffs gently over open flames. You've tried it once, during a tense but peaceful village negotiation. It was chewy, warm, and real. You almost cried, but the French army refuses to copy that method outright. Pride? Probably. The makeshift French bakeries still cling to old techniques unsuited for desert life. Dough meant for humid European kitchens doesn't behave the same way in the Sahara. Water evaporates too fast. Dough dries before it rises. Some batches don't rise at all. Others bubble strangely and smell like vinegar. One baker, a former apprentice from Marseille, starts whispering to the dough before baking, claiming it listens better that way. His loaves are just as bad, but at least he looks spiritually fulfilled. A common trick is to age the bread overnight, leave it in the sun, then try again tomorrow. The theory is it softens. It doesn't. What it does do is attract ants, which are somehow faster and hungrier than you. One day, during drill, your commanding officer collapses mid-shout. Not from enemy fire, he choked on a bread crust. 3 soldiers rush to help. One tries the Heimlich. Another just punches him in the back. Finally, the offending chunk is dislodged and lands with an audible ping on a nearby rock. It bounces. Historians still debate the impact of this incident. Some say it led to a temporary ban on mouthful marches. Others suggest it spurred a secret order from Napoleon to soften the damn loaves. No one really knows. What you do know is that bread starts coming out slightly undercooked. Still awful, but now also sticky. You try not to complain. You're grateful it no longer bruises your gums. One night, a soldier from the engineering corps rigs a small oven using copper scrap and the base of a broken cannon. The result? A flat, crisp cracker, edible, even kind of decent. Word spreads fast. He's immediately swarmed with requests. The next morning, his oven is gone. Stolen. Possibly by cavalry. That same week, a baker's assistant goes mad from heat and hunger, shouting, "It's alive!" as he flings dough into the Nile. A few soldiers cheer. A popular game emerges, guess the grain. You take a bite and try to identify what's actually in your bread. Wheat is rarely the answer. The guesses get wilder: dried weeds, crushed insects, powdered frog leg. Someone jokingly says hope. You all laugh too hard. The camp doctor begins recording bread-related injuries in his ledger: chipped teeth, jaw cramps, a fractured incisor from someone who bit straight into the heel of a loaf. He suggests a MASH diet for the worst cases, bread boiled into mush. This is even more horrifying than it sounds. Despite all this, the baking continues. Loaves appear, like clockwork. Ugly, cracked, sometimes mold-speckled, but present. You eat, you grimace, you carry on. What choice do you have? Napoleon still believes the army is thriving. He delivers rousing speeches near campfires, silhouetted dramatically. The desert tests you. He declares. But you are strong. A few men try to clap, but their hands are sticky with half-baked dough. That night, you try burying your bread under your blanket to warm it with body heat. It doesn't help. It just ends up sweaty and even harder. Henri suggests steaming it by sleeping with it under your armpit. Jean-Pierre flatly refuses. You lie down under the stars, your loaf doubling as a pillow. You wonder if it will fossilize. Maybe one day, an archaeologist will find it and say, "What ritual object is this?" You hope they try to eat it. Just once, the first time you try to bite into a fresh Egyptian loaf made by French hands, your teeth bounce off. Literally. You hear a faint click, and for a moment, you worry that one of your molars has defected to the British. You stare down at the thing in your hand. It's warm, slightly smoky, dense enough to anchor a small fishing boat. Its crust is splintered, sharp-edged, and flecked with what might be seeds or possibly gravel. You're not sure anymore. The smell is pleasant at first, roasted grain, a little firewood, but as you crack it open, a puff of warm, slightly acidic steam rises, and you know immediately, it's fermented, and not in the fun wine and cheese kind of way. You're not alone. A whole circle of soldiers around you sit chewing slowly, jaws working like oxen grinding grain. The sound is hypnotic. Crack. Chew. Pause. Someone groans. Someone else quietly spits a chunk into the sand. A third tries dipping his bread into wine. Then into water, then just gives up entirely and lies down. This loaf, this particular breed of culinary villain, is made from what the army now calls field grain. Not because it's grown in fields, but because it was swept up from one. Mixed wheat, crushed barley, millet, occasional birdseed, all gathered from reluctant Egyptian merchants or scavenged from neglected storehouses. The local population, of course, knows how to work with these ingredients. They soak the grains, grind them finely, shape them into small, flat rounds, and cook them quickly on searing stones or in clay ovens. The results are chewy, fragrant, and genuinely satisfying. The French, however, attempt to apply their usual bread-making rituals: thick dough, long proofing, baking in dense blocks. The result is what you're currently trying, and failing, to bite through: the infamous brick loaf. Jean-Pierre, sitting across from you, frowns dramatically. "This is not bread," he says. "It is betrayal." He takes out a small pocket knife and begins carving the crust. Not to eat it, just to see if he can. A few splinters flake off like wood shavings. Someone nearby uses his bread to hammer in a tent peg. Successfully, you try softening it again, dunking it into your canteen. It floats for a moment, then sinks ominously. When you retrieve it, it has absorbed nothing. It remains impervious. Even the British cannons, those thunderous, iron-hurling beasts that echo across the river from time to time, are easier to stomach than this daily punishment. At least you can dodge cannon fire. You can't dodge dinner. Historians still puzzle over how such basic logistics collapsed so thoroughly. Some blame Napoleon's arrogance. He assumed local resources would simply become available by charm or force. Others cite the heat, the spoilage, the broken supply lines, the lack of local translators in the early days. But none of that helps your molars. The worst part is that bread is supposed to be comforting. It's home. It's culture. It's warmth. And now it's dread. Every meal begins with someone saying, "Maybe today's will be better." It never is. You try trading. A few coins for a date, a piece of dried fish, even just a clean cloth to wrap the bread and pretend it's something else. But most locals aren't interested in French coin. And your comrades? They'll give you their bread for free if you promise not to give it back. Evenings bring little relief. The sun dips behind the horizon, but the loaves stay warm, hot, even, because they retain heat like bricks. Jean-Pierre tries slicing his thin and roasting it. The pieces curl into black, bitter strips that crackle when chewed. He eats 3. No one speaks. By now, many soldiers have developed techniques: scraping the crust with bayonets, soaking the center in wine, wrapping the whole thing in damp cloths overnight. One man claims if you whisper to it, it softens out of pity. He's likely sun-mad, but at least he's hopeful. Then comes a rare gift, a real loaf. A soft, golden, bubbly crusted creation smuggled in from a Cairo bakery by a translator with connections. It's torn apart in seconds. You get a corner, still warm, still tender. It melts on your tongue. You nearly cry. The next day, the translator is assigned latrine duty. Apparently, someone important wanted more of that bread for himself. Your dreams begin to change. No more war, no more guns. Just endless bakeries. Loaves rising in perfect ovens. Butter glistening. Steam lifting from fresh slices. And when you wake, a rock-hard square of culinary failure is waiting beside your cot. You take one look, sigh, and start carving. Boom. A cannon thunders in the distance. British, you assume, though no one bothers to run for cover. The cannonballs rarely reach this far inland, and after a week of chewing battlefield masonry disguised as bread, the idea of being blown up has started to lose its edge. You peer out from your tent flap. Dust hangs in the air like stage fog, stirred by wind and rumor. Some men look up, others don't. Jean-Pierre mutters, "At least the English serve their food with tea." It's not a complaint. It's a wistful sigh. The British guns are serious business. Their artillery is accurate, brutal, and frequent enough to become background noise. Yet among the rank-and-file soldiers of the French camp, cannon fire feels less threatening than the daily bread rations. There's even a running joke: if a cannonball hits you, at least it won't stay in your digestive system for 3 days. Napoleon remains outwardly calm, still delivering speeches about destiny and empire while the ground shakes beneath your boots. Do not fear the English, he proclaims. Fear mediocrity. But you do fear mediocrity. Specifically, mediocrity baked at 200 degrees over goat dung embers. Still, the British are advancing, or so the scouts claim. Their ships hug the coast, firing sporadically. Infantry movements flicker in reports, but they remain oddly cautious. It's likely they've intercepted French messages and discovered just how poorly the supply situation is going. Why rush a battle when your enemy might crumble from indigestion? You're marched out for drills anyway: bayonet practice under the scalding sun, followed by musket reload drills with fingers so dry they barely function. Your stomach growls audibly, echoed by the man next to you. A moment later, someone faints. Another bread casualty, the lieutenant says dryly, checking his notebook. Today's loaf is particularly defiant. You've developed a strategy by now: wedge the crust off with your spoon, hollow out the softer middle, and spread it thin like sad pâté. Except there's no soft middle today, just a solid core, the color of old parchment, riddled with what appear to be sesame seeds and, possibly, sand. You don't ask, but your body needs something. Anything. And so, with a grimace and a cracked molar, you eat. The cannon fire resumes around midday, echoing faintly across the hills. Nobody flinches. Ironically, the threat of British artillery unites the men. You huddle behind dunes and ruined walls, ducking when a shot lands close, but also trading bites of stolen figs, foraged greens, and occasionally a contraband egg. Cannon fire makes men generous. Bread, somehow, never does. Some officers try to rouse the troops with patriotism. France has sent her best. One shouts, waving a map. A soldier behind you mutters, "She sent us, and this bread." Nobody argues. Historians still puzzle over the British caution during this phase of the campaign. Some argue they feared Napoleon's genius in direct battle. Others say they preferred siege tactics and psychological attrition. One school of thought suggests they simply waited for the French to starve, or, more specifically, to turn on their own rations. The soldiers start to say things like, "At least a cannonball ends things quickly." And you know they're not talking about war. You begin to wonder whether your body is adapting or simply surrendering. The bread no longer causes nausea, just a dull ache and recurring dreams of chewing rubber bands. Some men joke about organizing a protest. Others are busy sculpting their loaves into figures, tiny caricatures of Napoleon, miniature donkeys, occasionally crude interpretations of bread ovens that don't exist. You're sitting near the riverbank that evening, toes in the cool Nile water, when another shot echoes from across the horizon. This one lands closer. You glance over. A plume of smoke rises where the baking tent once stood. No injuries, except to morale. The bread pit is gone. It's an odd, quiet moment. Nobody cheers. Nobody cries. You all just exhale. Even the birds seem to pause. That night, the cook makes porridge from salvaged grain. It's warm, bland, and oddly comforting. You eat it with both hands, silently, as stars rise above the distant palms. For the first time in weeks, your jaw doesn't ache. Your stomach relaxes. You sleep well. The next morning, the bakers are already building a new oven. The bread will return. You don't know how it started. Maybe someone bit too hard, or maybe someone laughed mid-chew, but suddenly, word spreading like fire through the ranks: Jacques lost a tooth to breakfast. You find him near the edge of camp, surrounded by curious onlookers. He's holding up a molar like it's a trophy, grinning, lopsidedly, and slurring, "Told you it wasn't worth it." His loaf sits beside him on a rock, ominously unbitten. Someone tries to cut it with a bayonet for analysis. The blade bounces back. The incident sparks a strange sort of camaraderie, mock heroic storytelling around the fire. He was a brave man, felled by crust. Gone to the molar gods. the first casualty of the Battle of Bread. Everyone's laughing, but there's a flicker of real fear beneath the jokes. Because you've all felt it, that unnerving crack mid-bite. The panicked tongue sweep to check if your dental infrastructure is still intact. By week's end, the camp doctor has developed a small chart, signs of bread-induced dental stress. It includes soreness, bleeding gums, visible cracks, and the sudden appearance of more tongue than usual. He's completely serious. He recommends chewing only with back molars and soaking rations in hot water whenever possible. One soldier insists he's inventing a new method, grinding the bread into powder and snorting it like exotic spice. No one has the heart to stop him. You, meanwhile, take to breaking your bread with a rock before eating it. Less poetic, perhaps, but it saves your jaw. Henri soaks his in Nile water, then stuffs it in his boot during marches for extra warmth. He calls it soul baking. And then there's Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre has reached a point of philosophical despair that only former pastry chefs can achieve. He begins lecturing anyone who'll listen: bread must be coaxed, not forced. You can't bully yeast. The men mostly nod politely while chewing on their misery. One morning, you catch him trying to meditate beside a lump of dough, whispering to it like a disappointed father. It doesn't rise. The locals, of course, have noticed. A few offer their own flatbreads to officers or curious soldiers, but the language gap and the tension make these exchanges brief and hesitant. You do manage to trade a handkerchief for 2 pieces of authentic Aish Boladi. When you bite into it warm, soft, slightly nutty, you nearly weep. You don't share. Back at camp, teeth continue to fall. Not in droves, but 1 or 2 per week. Enough that a new insult develops: careful, or you'll be gumming your musket. Historians still argue whether dental decline among the French soldiers had a measurable impact on fighting efficiency. One camp claims the issue was overstated. After all, soldiers weren't expected to smile, just shoot. Another argues that chronic pain, difficulty eating, and lack of sleep due to jaw aches contributed to poor morale and slow response in combat. You, of course, fall squarely in the "this is ruining my life" category. There's even talk of fashioning crude dentures out of leftover wood or ivory looted from village stores. One corporal allegedly uses a carved chess piece. You can't verify this, but it's exactly the kind of story that gains traction in times like these. You write a letter home, though you don't mention the bread. It's not worth explaining. You say you're healthy. That morale is holding. That Egypt is hot, but interesting. What you don't write is that your days revolve around avoiding food more than avoiding the enemy. Still, people adapt. You see one man using his bayonet to saw thin layers off his loaf like firewood. Another creates a bread salad by tearing his ration into bits and covering it with vinegar and onion scraps. Someone else gives up entirely and begins fasting every other day, claiming religious devotion. Nobody questions it. At night, the air cools and you lie on your back, mouth sore, bread untouched. You've hidden it beneath your blanket like a shameful relic. You hear distant cannon fire and roll your eyes, not in fear, but in irritation. Let the British come. Maybe they'll bring biscuits. A shooting star streaks across the sky. Henri whispers, "I wished for soft food." You both chuckle, then, with great reluctance, you reach for your loaf and begin again. Somewhere between the sunburn, the sand in your underpants, and the rising dental casualties, it hits you: we've been here for months, and we still don't know what we're doing. Not just you, the entire expedition. Napoleon's campaign feels less like a military operation and more like a traveling theater troupe that's forgotten its script. There's talk that Napoleon expected a quick, glorious conquest. A triumphant parade into Cairo, maybe a few ceremonial camels, and then a brisk march east to disrupt the British in India. Instead, he's gotten an uncooperative climate, grumpy locals, and a logistical nightmare powered by stone-hard bread and dysentery. You spend your days watching small crises unfold. Horses dying from dehydration. Soldiers fainting from sunstroke. The science team, a gaggle of bespectacled men in crumpled linen, attempts to measure the Nile while being eaten alive by mosquitoes. Someone tries to make coffee out of lentils. It tastes like betrayal, and the bread, of course, persists. It's no longer just a nuisance, it's a symbol of bad planning, of French arrogance, Of every promise Napoleon made that's crumbling like a stale crust in your hand. You start referring to it simply as the loaf, capitalized, ominous. You hear phrases like the loaf took another or I dreamed of bread again, screaming this time. Meanwhile, morale wobbles. At first, the men look to Napoleon with admiration. He gives stirring speeches, rides dramatically across the dunes, and insists he has a grand vision. But lately, he's been strange. Muttering to himself. Writing obsessively. He rarely eats the bread, you notice. Rumor has it he has a stash of imported biscuits locked away in a trunk. If true, it's a betrayal worse than defeat. The march is grueling. The sun burns your skin through layers of cloth. Sand sneaks into every crevice. At one point, a camel collapses. It doesn't even try to stand again. Just sighs, blinks, and waits for death like a bored librarian. Water grows scarce. The officers argue about wells that don't exist. You're issued a canteen of something that might be wine but smells like vinegar. The bread, somehow, gets worse, sun-baked into little pucks of despair. Someone jokes that you could tile a roof with them. No one laughs, you begin hallucinating food. Not feasts, just softness. A ripe pear. A boiled potato. Even a slice of raw onion, if it wouldn't shatter your molars. At night, the camp is eerily silent. No singing, no gambling, not even arguments. Just quiet chewing and the occasional groan of a man trying to digest his concrete supper. You lie awake and think of your childhood: warm soup, warm bed, warm bread. The memories feel like fiction. Historians still debate whether Napoleon underestimated the Egyptian terrain or simply overestimated French endurance. Some say he was blinded by ambition. Others argue that the entire expedition was a kind of imperial fever dream, more symbolic than strategic. You, of course, feel like a character in someone else's tragicomedy. A background soldier in a painting no one finishes. Then, one morning, something strange happens. The bread rations don't arrive. You're used to chaos, delays, shortages, spoiled meat, but this is different. There's no explanation. No replacement. The officer just shrugs and says, "Out." You and your fellow soldiers exchange glances. Relief? Confusion? Hunger. Henri mutters, "What now? We eat sand?" Jean-Pierre brightens. Perhaps it's a sign. A reset. A divine baguette fast. You ignore him. By midday, someone's cooking a stew of cactus, dried fish, and hope. You sip it and feel actual flavor. It's not good, but it's possible. A spark of change. A small, slushy revolution in your stomach. That night, you dream of France. Not the parades or the flags, but a crusty loaf, golden, crackling, warm inside. It breaks easily in your hands. You cry in your sleep. The next day, the bread returns. It's somehow harder. You bite it anyway, because you're a soldier, and that's what soldiers do. You wake to the sound of gunfire, not the loud, chaotic storm of a battlefield, but sharp, testing shots. Practice volleys. Somewhere out in the dunes, Napoleon's officers are drilling a group of jittery conscripts who've never held a musket in battle. A few months ago, you would have found the sight comforting. Disciplined. Today, it just seems like theater. The real enemy out here isn't the British. It's bread. And heat. And silence. The long, dragging kind of silence that fills your ears when even the wind can't be bothered to show up. You stretch your aching legs and glance at what's left of breakfast, a small square of bread so dense it echoes when dropped. Someone recently tried slicing it with a bayonet. The blade lost. That person now drinks all his meals. The science corps has taken to weighing the bread. Just a theory, one of them says, adjusting his dusty spectacles. If density continues to increase linearly, by mid-August, it will collapse into a loaf-shaped black hole. He's only half joking. Meanwhile, the British loom as a kind of rumor. You rarely see them. Never hear them. But their presence stalks every order, every march, every twitch of Napoleon's brow. He acts calm, but his inner circle is frazzled. You once saw a general try to wash his uniform in camel urine, then sob when it shrunk. Napoleon's command tent is quiet these days. He writes constantly. letters, plans, half-poems about glory and fire. Some say he's trying to recreate Alexander's conquest, step by step. Others think he just likes the idea of being somewhere else. You can relate. One afternoon, you're assigned patrol duty near a desert village that's reluctantly cooperating. No looting, your officer warns. But you know. Be persuasive. You interpret that as don't get caught. The village is dry, cracked, sleepy. A goat blinks at you like it knows something. The baker's hut is abandoned, a clay oven cold. You peek inside and find what looks like a loaf, but it's older than hope. You leave it alone, then, miracle of miracles, you find a local boy selling flatbread, thin, warm, bendy. You hand over a coin without haggling, you tear off a corner. The texture is almost fictional, pliable, delicate, even a little chewy. You moan audibly. The boy laughs. You bring some back to camp, expecting a hero's welcome. Instead, you get confusion. This isn't bread, Henri sniffs. It's a pancake with delusions of grandeur. But they eat it anyway. Word spreads. Soon, more soldiers wander into villages and come back with soft, local bread wrapped in cloth. The shift is subtle, almost secret. The official rations still exist, dusty and indestructible. But behind tents, around cooking fires, tiny revolutions are happening. You hear rumors of soldiers bartering buttons for naan, trading rum for roti. Someone claims to have seen a lieutenant crying while eating something called aish boladi. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's army truly adapted to local food culture or if these instances were isolated. Desperate gestures. Some suggest the general himself tried Egyptian bread once, declared it un-French, and ordered it buried. Others say he never knew what his soldiers were eating by the end. You know the truth, survival has nothing to do with pride. Meanwhile, tensions rise, the British are closing in. Cairo's getting restless. The Mamluks remain a wildcard, fierce, fast, and increasingly organized. Napoleon doubles the drills. You fire your musket until your shoulder bruises. Your mouth tastes of powder and regret. That night, you overhear a conversation between two officers. They're arguing about bread again. One more shipment from France, says the first. Better flour. Softer results. The other snorts. And will it bake itself under the Nile? You retreat into the dark, clutching a bit of village flatbread wrapped in your scarf. You nibble it quietly, hiding the sound, feeling like a child hoarding treasure. The difference is undeniable. It doesn't fight your teeth. It doesn't echo in your gut. It doesn't mock you. Just before you sleep, you whisper a small, stupid prayer. Let them forget the rations, let them forget the loaf, let softness win. You wake to whispers. Not urgent ones, more like the murmuring of bored men trying to make sense of another long, hot morning. Someone's gone missing again, probably wandered too far for shade and lost their way. The desert is excellent at erasing. As you sit up and stretch, you're offered a piece of something miraculous, bread that doesn't look like it's been forged by blacksmiths. Word has spread far beyond your regiment now. Egyptian flatbread is catching on. Not officially, of course. The army's supplies still arrive in tightly guarded shipments, and the quartermaster still hands out rations like holy relics, but the soldiers know better. They've found bakeries. Secret ones. Some even joke that a black market has formed, one fueled by ink, copper, and whatever else you're willing to trade to escape the tyranny of French military dough. You spend the morning hauling crates near the Nile. Not glamorous work, but there's a breeze off the water, and you get to eavesdrop on a heated conversation between two artillerymen about whether it's worse to chew the bread or to try and soak it into a paste. One claims he chipped a molar. The other swears it once bounced off a drum with a metallic clang, but beyond the jokes, there's tension in the air. The British have landed in the Nile Delta, and their advance inland has begun. Supplies are being rerouted. Some regiments haven't had fresh food in days. Those crusty loaves, formerly mocked, are now hoarded like gold. Not because they're edible. Just because they exist. That afternoon, you're assigned to a reconnaissance party near Alexandria. It's a long march, heat bearing down on your back like a slow roasting sun, but the reward is real: a coastal breeze, shade beneath fig trees, and the smell of fish instead of feet. You pass a field where Egyptian farmers work quietly, almost motionless in the heat. One of them breaks off to approach. He holds out something in cloth. You don't reach for your weapon, you're too tired for paranoia. Inside the cloth, small rounds of flatbread. Still warm. Steam rises like a benediction. You trade a pair of bootlaces for it, not even thinking. He nods solemnly, like this is exactly the exchange he expected. Then he fades back into the field like a mirage. Your party eats beneath a fig tree. One man dips the bread into olive oil he's been saving since Cairo. Another spreads a soft cheese he found during a night raid on a caravan. The meal is wordless. Sacred, you chew slowly. Thoughtfully. It's the first thing in weeks that doesn't make you feel like you're being punished. Historians still debate whether these moments, these tiny, shared meals, meant anything in the larger picture of the campaign. Some argue that bread was a symbol of imperial arrogance, France, insisting on its own culinary supremacy even in foreign sand. Others suggest these stolen bites of local food were quiet acts of rebellion, proof that a soldier's belly can be more persuasive than his flag. Later that night, back at camp, you find a note tucked into your boot. No name, no signature. Just one line: bake soft or bury hard. You chuckle. It's a clear jab at the quartermaster's latest delivery, a shipment of bread so dense it shattered 2 storage jars and knocked out a mule, but the phrase sticks in your mind. You repeat it under your breath as you clean your musket. You hear it in the cadence of the marching drums. And you're not the only one. A few days later, a lieutenant is reprimanded for possessing unauthorized bakery goods. There's an inquiry, a trial, the bread is examined. One of the officers leans in to sniff it. Smells like garlic, he says, as if identifying a forbidden spell. Definitely Egyptian. The accused says nothing. Just shrugs. Napoleon himself never addresses it. But his silence is interpreted a dozen different ways. Some say he secretly approved. Others say he didn't notice, too busy chasing ancient pharaohs through scrolls and sand. One thing's clear: the bread war is no longer just about texture, it's about identity. Are you a French soldier, or a hungry human being with sore gums and a yearning for flavor? The next morning, a barrel of French rations mysteriously rolls into the Nile. No one claims responsibility, but that night, a dozen soldiers sit in a loose circle, passing flatbread wrapped in palm leaves, quietly humming old French songs between bites. You lean back against a rock, belly full and heart oddly light. Even the stars seem less harsh tonight. You wake to dust in your nose and a boot in your ribs. A sergeant grumbles something about scouts, missing maps, and the rising British threat, but you're too busy thinking about bread again. You dreamt of it, thick, pillowy, warm and smeared with something tangy. Maybe lemon? Your waking life is starting to blend with your dreams, and not in a good way. Rations arrive late that morning, and they're worse. Somehow. The crust looks like the bark of a long dead tree. The inside is a pale, rubbery horror. One of your comrades knocks his loaf on the side of his rifle and it actually makes a clink. Everyone laughs, but it's hollow. Hunger is wearing the humor thin. Then something strange happens. A courier arrives from Cairo. Not a military one, but a local runner, young and barefoot, with a message hand-delivered to your quartermaster. The note is simple. New ovens. Better grain. Arranged by local hands. There's a time and place, no names, no explanation. That night, you sneak away with a small group. You take back roads, past ruined temples and collapsed irrigation channels. Guided by torchlight and caution. At the edge of a village, beneath a grove of date palms, you find it. The smell hits you first: charcoal smoke, yeast, flour dust in the air. Then the ovens. 3 of them, shaped like beehives, glowing orange from within. Egyptian women and old men shuffle between them, flipping dough on long wooden paddles. Nearby, a French soldier stirs something in a tin pot: lentils and cumin. It's a scene straight out of a fairy tale, and you're allowed in. No questions, no guns, no orders. Just nods and hands dusted in flour offering you a turn at the paddle. You bake. Badly, at first. Your flatbread tears. Your fire gets too hot. You burn a few rounds. And the locals snort with amusement, but they help. They teach. One woman grabs your wrist and guides it in a slow, careful swirl, like dancing with dough. The bread that comes out is different. Still rustic, yes, but tender. Foldable. With a satisfying chew. You tear off a piece, wrap it around a bit of lentil stew, and it's heavenly. Not French. Not Egyptian. Something in between, and that's when you realize this isn't just about hunger anymore. This is adaptation. Survival. Quiet diplomacy. Historians still debate how widespread these bread exchanges were. Some claim they were rare, scattered acts of defiance or desperation. Others argue they became so common that officers eventually turned a blind eye. One British spy report even mentioned a notable decrease in French dental complaints, which, if nothing else, proves that someone was paying attention. Back at your camp, word spreads. Palm Grove bread, they start calling it. A few officers mock it as peasant cuisine. Others send their aides to find the source. One captain even writes a letter home, describing the oven's construction in detail, claiming he might replicate it in Toulon. The quartermaster, predictably, is furious. He starts doubling down on regulations. No outside food. No deviation from issued rations. He even inspects soldiers' bags at random, but enforcement is tricky when half the regiment already has bread stashed in their boots. One night, while on watch, you hear humming. It's the oven song. A soft, rhythmic tune you picked up during baking, now passed among troops like a lullaby. A melody carried by smoke and memory. You find yourself humming it as you load your musket. You catch others doing the same. It binds you not as soldiers, but as men sharing something fragile in a place built for breaking. Then, without warning, the ovens disappear. You return to the grove one evening and find it empty. Ashes in the dirt. Footprints, but no flames. Someone must have tipped them off, maybe a nervous officer, maybe a British patrol. No one knows, but the bread remains. You still carry it. You still share it. You still dream of it, and when the next shipment of French rations arrives, complete with a new and improved recipe, you can't help but laugh, because you know better now. Bread is not a commodity, it's a culture. And it always finds a way to rise. By now, you know the routine. Wake up sore. Brush sand from your ears. Choose something approximating food. Trudge. Sweat. Watch for mirages, but something shifted, not in your boots, but in your thinking. Ever since the bread from the palm grove, you've begun noticing things. Like the way local farmers use shallow canals to coax crops out of the desert. Or how their oxen walk in perfectly timed circles to draw water from wells that seem almost ancient. It dawns on you that Egypt's not just ancient temples and jackal-headed gods. It's systems. Adaptations. Lessons carved by time and climate into every inch of the land. Napoleon, in his infinite ego, called Egypt a land of ruins. But you're starting to see the opposite. It's alive, painfully so, sometimes, but enduring. And speaking of enduring, today's bread isn't quite as terrible as before. Rumors swirl that someone high up in Cairo requisitioned an Armenian baker. Possibly as a bribe, possibly as an apology. No one's sure. All you know is that today's loaf didn't break your molar. Small victories. One of your friends, Jacques, swears he saw the baker himself, round-faced, bearded, covered in flour, scolding a French officer in 3 languages. You want to believe it. It's nice to imagine someone with power caring enough to fix things, even if it's only bread. Still, enforcement of food rules continues. One sergeant gets caught hoarding flatbreads and is reassigned to latrine duty. Another is rumored to have traded a bayonet for a jar of local pickled lemons. You believe that those lemons are like sunshine in a jar, and you trade your dignity for less. Historians still argue about how disciplined Napoleon's food supply lines were during the Egyptian campaign. Officially, he had logistics officers and quartermasters with detailed ration records. Unofficially, soldiers like you were bartering with locals for onions, dried dates, and, yes, good bread. One scholar even found a note in a captured French diary: if our baker were an English cannon, I would still fear the baker more. And you don't blame them. One day, your unit is stationed near an oasis. The kind with palm trees, still water, and just enough breeze to make you think the world might not be trying to kill you. You spend the afternoon sketching. It's not good, just lines in the sand. Literally, but it helps. The rhythm of drawing the bread ovens from memory soothes you. You even catch a lizard watching you, unimpressed. Then, during a rare moment of leisure, your lieutenant tells you something odd. Apparently, British scouts intercepted a French supply cart last week. Expected to find ammo or maps. Instead, dozens of bread samples, charred, crumbling, wrapped in burlap, each labeled with a number. Napoleon's scientists, he claims, were conducting field tests. Controlled burns. Moisture analysis. Crumb density. Your army was weaponizing wheat. You want to laugh, but you're not surprised. This is, after all, the same expedition that brought zoologists into battle. Later that week, you pass through a village with a strangely empty bakery. No people, just shelves and silence. A local boy sells you a loaf anyway. It's warm, dense, flecked with fennel seeds. You eat it slowly, in the shade of a half-collapsed wall. For a moment, you forget where you are. You forget your blisters, your orders, even the faint distant boom of artillery. All you know is the bread. Earthy. Savory. Real, and you understand something new. Fear isn't always about death or danger. Sometimes, it's about absence. The fear that this moment, this taste, might never come again. That's what the soldiers feared. Not just starvation, but the dull ache of bad bread. The way it chipped at your sanity, day after day, until you stopped remembering what joy tasted like. You gather the crumbs in your palm and brush them into your mouth. Waste nothing, and as the sun dips below the minarets and the call to prayer echoes across the sand, you wonder, would Napoleon himself notice if the bread improved? Probably not. He'd be too busy planning glory. Too focused on maps and medals, but you'd notice, and that's enough. It's amazing what a difference a decent loaf can make. After weeks of culinary despair, a modest improvement in bread quality spreads joy through the ranks like gossip in a convent. You even hear someone whistle. Whistle. In Egypt. In July, of course, no one says it out loud. You don't tempt fate that way. But mealtimes now end with slightly less grumbling and slightly more chewing. And the word bread no longer causes men to visibly wince. Still, nothing's ever simple in a campaign like this, because just as your bread situation improves, your orders change. You're to march with a smaller unit west of Cairo, new territory, new risks, fewer supplies. Which, in this case, means saying goodbye to the slightly better bread and hello again to the baked ambiguity that passes for military rationing. The day you leave, the Armenian baker stands outside his shop. Arms crossed, watching the column go. You raise your hand in thanks. He nods, barely, then vanishes behind a hanging rug. The road west is no easier than what you've known. Rocky plains give way to dry ravines. Sometimes you pass the ruins of old Roman outposts. Other times, it's just bones and beetles. But worst of all is the return of the dreaded emergency ration, hardtack soaked in local water, then crisped again under the sun. A culinary crime. You break your molar on one. It wasn't even a big bite. There's a field surgeon in your unit. His name's Fournier, and he's more herbalist than doctor, but he's good with tools and has a bottle of brandy that's mostly alcohol. The extraction is quick, brutal, and successful. He lets you keep the tooth. A souvenir, he says. That night, you tuck the tooth into your pocket next to a crumb from the Armenian bread. It's become a sort of talisman now, proof that good things once existed. Historians still debate whether the French command truly understood how critical morale was to maintaining an army in such a hostile land. You're living proof of the oversight. Give a man a steady meal, and he'll march for days. Deny him taste, and he'll lose the will before he even sees the enemy. And yet, somehow, your body persists. You adapt. You learn to ignore the constant grumble in your stomach, the ache in your back. You start to sleep through sandstorms, and you can now spot a scorpion before it spots you, a valuable skill. One morning, your patrol stumbles upon a ruined granary. Abandoned, half-collapsed, roof open to the sky. But inside, miraculously, are sacks. Real sacks of grain. Local, probably. You and your unit cheer like children. It's not joy. It's relief. That sudden, quiet panic easing from your chest, the grains are sun-dried and mostly intact. You don't know what kind they are, some mixture of barley, millet, and something fragrant. Maybe coriander. Fournier says it smells like health. You build a makeshift oven out of stones and an old helmet. Someone has salt, someone else has an onion, and together you make the closest thing to edible flatbread your squad has tasted in days. It's rough, chewy, undercooked in parts and burned in others, but it's yours. There's something sacred in that. You sit in a circle and eat without speaking. Even the birds are quiet, as if paying respect. The bread sticks in your teeth and crumbles in your lap. You don't care. Later, while on guard duty, you remember something from home, your grandmother's kitchen, the way she slapped dough with practiced rhythm, humming a song that had no words. You haven't thought of her in years. And yet, here she is, her memory rising like steam from a pot you can't see. Funny what bread can do. Scholars sometimes point out that the French soldiers wrote more letters home about food than about battles. Some cite this as proof of poor morale. Others argue it's just human. When the bullets stop flying, you think about bread. When your boots bleed and your friends collapse, you think about bread. Not glory. Not strategy. Bread, and maybe that's what truly frightened the men about Egypt. Not just its heat or its insects or its silent, unblinking monuments. But the idea that you could lose yourself out here. Become unmoored from taste, from memory, from the daily rituals that tether you to the self you once were. In a way, fear of the bread was fear of forgetting home. That night, with the fire crackling and your belly just barely full, you write a letter. You describe the granary, the helmet oven, the accidental flatbread. You tuck a few grains into the envelope. If it survives the journey, your family might even plant them. You sign the letter with a half smile, not private first class, not Napoleon's man, just your name, because tonight, for the first time in a long time, you feel human again. You wake to gunfire. It's not nearby, just a dull thump in the distance, followed by a sharper crack. But your body reacts before your mind does. You sit up, grab your musket, and roll to your feet in one motion, the way you've been trained. Muscle memory. Survival reflex. The sky's still pink, the air cool, but already dust is rising to the west. Another unit under fire? Maybe skirmishers testing the edge of camp? You don't know. You just fall into rank and start marching again, one gritty bootstep after another, but something shifted in your group. It's not panic. It's something quieter, sadder. A weariness that sinks deep into your bones and makes your chest feel hollow. Because last night's bread, so warm, so accidental, so comforting, is gone. Eaten, digested, already part of your bloodstream, and you can't get it back. Now, you're on the hard stuff again. Regulation issue. Dusty brown loaves delivered from Cairo in carts, already half molded, half brick. The flavor? Vaguely of sand. You chew because you must. Not because you want to, and suddenly, it's obvious, bread is no longer a nuisance. It's the enemy. You're not the only one thinking it. Morale among the men dips noticeably. Conversations slow. Laughter fades. Even the usual bellyaching about fleas or latrine duty takes a back seat. No one wants to talk about food anymore, and that's how you know you're close to breaking. Historians still argue whether the French campaign in Egypt failed because of military strategy, British interference, or disease. But to you, it's always been simpler. You lost the war because of the bread, because when your daily ration becomes an obstacle, not a comfort, not even fuel, but an actual psychological barrier, something inside you cracks. Just a little. Just enough. You remember reading about ancient sieges, where starving soldiers ate leather or tree bark. But no one ever tells you how bread can break a man long before he's hungry. Just bad enough to be inedible, yet required by the regulations. That's the genius of it. You still have food. You just wish you didn't. Your captain is no help. He's a stiff-backed Parisian with a mustache so wide it deserves its own tent. Bread is not the concern, he says. Discipline is the concern. But you've seen him slip a fig tart from his officer's box when no one's looking. One night, a fellow soldier offers you a trade, a small wedge of old Dutch cheese for your bread. You agree instantly. The cheese smells like death and regret. It's glorious. In private, the men whisper about mutiny, not against Napoleon, no. Against the quartermaster. Against the bakeries. Against the entire concept of wheat. The jokes are bitter now. Someone swears he saw a camel try to eat the rations and walk away in disgust. You laugh, but it catches in your throat. During one patrol, you're assigned to watch a depot, an actual warehouse of flour. Guard duty. The dream, right? But all you feel is despair. Because even here, surrounded by potential bread, you know what will become of it. Crushed. Overcooked. Mixed with river water in despair, so when a mouse skitters across the floor with a stolen crumb, you salute it, at least someone will enjoy it. You mutter, then comes the incident. Your unit has just been reassigned again, this time near the Nile. Mosquitoes reign here, buzzing like invisible artillery. You sleep in your boots. You drink water with your fingers crossed, and you get sick, not from a bullet. Not from plague. From bread, that day's ration is particularly rancid, sour, green-flecked, reeking of fermentation gone wrong. You take one bite, spit it out, and by dusk, your gut feels like it's tied in knots. You're doubled over by midnight. Fournier gives you a slug of something clear and terrifying. It helps. Or maybe you just pass out. In the haze of fever, you see things, your grandmother again, yes, but now she's laughing. Behind her is the Armenian baker, arms crossed, judgmental. Napoleon walks by with a baguette for a sword. You begin to suspect bread may be a curse, and maybe it is. There's a growing rumor that the Egyptians warned Napoleon's men not to bake using Nile water. Too many spirits, they said. Too many old bones in the soil. The French laughed, of course. But you're not laughing anymore, because you've seen men flinch at mealtime the way others flinch at enemy fire. You've seen grown soldiers weep quietly over a meal. You've seen bread become a form of punishment. And still, it's in your pack every morning, wrapped in burlap. Heavy. Mocking, there's a reason some units started burying it. Little rituals. A grave for the loaf. Some men swore it brought them luck. Others just needed a moment of closure. You try it once, late at night. Dig a shallow hole near your tent and gently place the loaf inside. You pat the dirt down. You sleep better than usual. One day, Napoleon himself passes by your unit on horseback. He looks smaller in person. Tired. Thinner. You wonder what his bread is like. Probably warm. Probably shaped like victory. You don't wave, you're too busy fantasizing about something soft. A croissant. A crusty country boule. Even a baguette. Anything not made with scorched flour and whispered curses. Later that week, the enemy strikes a supply convoy. Bread goes missing. No one cheers. No one blames them. The only thing worse than marching on an empty stomach, it turns out, is marching on a full one. If the food is Egyptian bread, you've been back in France for months now, and still you can taste the dust. You're sitting on a splintered bench outside a friend's home near Lyon, the smell of fresh baguettes drifting from a bakery just down the cobblestone street. The bread here is golden, warm, crisp-edged and yeasty. You break off a piece, let it steam in your palm for a moment, and you hesitate. Your friend chuckles. What's wrong? You look like it's about to explode. You shake your head. Just checking for brick fragments. Because that fear, it doesn't vanish. Not after what you lived through in Egypt. You were supposed to remember the cannons. The redcoats. The retreat from Acre. The desert winds and the crocodile rumors. And sure, those memories flicker behind your eyes sometimes, especially when the house gets too quiet. But mostly, it's the bread that thudded when dropped. Bread that chipped teeth. Bread that grew fur overnight and bit back, metaphorically and, once, debatably literally. You still dream about it. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. No, your brain is crueler than that. In your dreams, you're always sitting down for dinner, just as the light fades and you lift the lid to reveal one of those loaves. You always wake before the first bite, your comrades feel it too. You meet up sometimes, the way old soldiers do, laughing about lice and sunburns and terrible officers. But when the talk turns to meals, everyone grows still. Someone mentions field ration bread and another guy winces so hard he pulls something in his neck. Fournier swears he developed a lifelong gluten allergy just from the trauma. You suspect he just doesn't like carbs. But still, you get it. Because you weren't the same soldier once the bread turned. None of you were. There's this quiet, unspoken agreement among veterans of the Egyptian campaign. The real threat wasn't the Ottomans or the heat or the snipers or even the plagues. It was what you carried in your sack each morning, pretending it was food. Pretending it was fine. Historians still debate what caused the final morale collapse among the French troops stationed near Cairo. Some say it was malaria. Others point to the lack of reinforcements or worsening diplomatic isolation. But you know deep down, with absolute clarity, that it was the bread, because something happens to a man when the very thing meant to nourish him becomes a curse. A heaviness settles over his thoughts. A suspicion forms that no comfort will ever last, no meal will ever truly satisfy. That every bite might be your undoing. You heard stories from men who began to smuggle in British biscuits. Others who bribed local cooks for flatbreads even if they tasted like soap. Some grew gaunt not from famine, but from pure rebellion against the stuff. Quiet hunger strikes in the tent lines. Officers turning blind eyes. And Napoleon? Oh, he probably knew. But what could he say? He was no baker. Just a short guy with a complex and a continent to conquer. In your darker moments, you wonder if it was all deliberate. Break the bodies, sure, but break the spirits too. One brick at a time. Now, back home, you sit with real bread in front of you. Bread that bends, that flakes, that sings a little when torn. Your stomach rumbles. Your hands tremble. You take the bite, soft, airy. No grit, and something in you unclenches for the first time in years. The Egyptian campaign will haunt the French military for generations. Not for its political implications. Not for its scientific blunders or cultural pillaging. But for the quiet truth no general ever dared report. We did not fear bullets, we feared the bakery tent. And now, as the last crumbs of this journey settle softly into the sand, you can feel the weight lifting from your shoulders. You made it back, not just from Egypt, but from a memory that has been with you for far too long. The desert winds have quieted. The phantom bread that once loomed so large in your dreams has finally begun to fade, replaced by something warmer. Softer. Easier to chew. Let yourself drift now. Feel the heaviness in your limbs. The calm behind your eyes. There are no cannons, no rations, no rank to report to. Only the steady rhythm of your breath, the gentle hush of night wrapping around you like a wool blanket. Maybe tomorrow, you'll wake with clearer thoughts. Maybe the next loaf will taste like comfort instead of survival. And maybe, just maybe, you'll laugh again at how something so simple managed to nearly undo an empire. But not tonight. Tonight, you're safe, far from the Nile, far from the oven smoke and dust-choked marches, back in a world where bread is just bread. Close your eyes. Let the stars above Egypt flicker one last time before they vanish behind your eyelids. Let the quiet hum of sleep pull you deeper into stillness. You've earned it, sweet dream.